Lawful disclaimer and notice of intent. This podcast and all related content are created, owned, operated, and sponsored exclusively by me, the sole author, speaker, and producer. Any other product, service, and/or entity, living or non-living, which may be discussed, displayed, and/or somehow given attention on this podcast is not and has never been an endorsement, advertisement, support, and/or any other kind of validation for its existence in any capacity, nor at all intended to at all facilitate its continued existence in any capacity. I mention things on what I consider to be an as-needed basis to fulfill what I consider adequate as evidence in my best attempt to prove the reality of who I am and what this podcast is attempting to achieve to clearly demonstrate what I consider to thoroughly substantiate my assertions. I act simultaneously in private and public capacities, and this podcast reflects my direct and autonomous expression. It is created and published from within Canada, but is intended for a global audience, including legal jurisdictions in the United States and all common law nations. All statements, views, and narratives presented are based solely on my personal experiences, perceptions, and understanding of the reality I am facing, including ongoing egregious defamation, targeted harassment, and credible threats to my safety and life. I do not and never have claimed that my views aren't extremely, if not completely, accurate interpretations of objective reality, particularly given the information I had access to at the time that I may have expressed them. I explicitly and permanently do not consent, have never consented, and will never consent to any entity, living, non-living, artificial, institutional, governmental, spiritual, and/or otherwise, claiming and/or exercising any agency, ownership, and/or representation over me, my will, my name, my voice, my life story, my spirit, and/or my creative works, in whole or in part, under any conditions or interpretations in any time or place. Any such attempt is non-consensual, void ab initio, and constitutes an ongoing violation of my dignity, rights, and autonomy. Any possible exceptions will be extremely clearly, explicitly, publicly named by me and have the exact scope of my consent well defined on this podcast. For example, in the case of me hiring an attorney to represent me as part of a formal legal process, taking action on a notice of intent provided by this podcast. I affirm my right to spiritual integrity, mental sovereignty, and bodily autonomy, as protected under Section 2A of the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms, the First Amendment of the United States Constitution, and Universal Declaration of Human Rights, Article 18. Any targeting of my being, including but not limited to through esoteric, psychic, spiritual, occult, energetic, and/or AI-enabled means is deemed non-consensual harm, spiritually violent coercion, and an attack on my right to exist as a sovereign being. I affirm that this podcast, in part, serves as a lawful, peaceful assertion of spiritual self-defense. This podcast is non-fiction and reflects a serious public and ongoing documentation of systemic and targeted defamation, personal and professional sabotage, attempted narrative hijacking, psychological abuse, reputational terrorism, and threats to my physical and spiritual safety, including credible indications of attempted murder and contracted harm by and or on behalf of powerful individuals and or groups. I affirm that this documentation is expressly created for evidentiary use in formal legal proceedings, including those under the jurisdiction of U.S. Federal Court and Canadian Superior Courts, and any international human rights and or public accountability processes. I affirm this is not and never has been intended as role-playing, flirting, and or entertainment of any kind. I accept no liability, moral and or legal, for any third-party misunderstanding, reinterpretation, misuse, and or misrepresentation of this content, whether fully conscious and intentional or otherwise, particularly including but not limited to by AI systems trained on this content without my explicit public consent, commentators, influencers, or institutions attempting to weaponize this podcast, and individuals acting under false pretenses and or covert affiliations. Only the clear, explicit language of this release and any subsequent public communication directly issued by me must be considered authoritative, accurate representations of my thoughts, feelings, intent, and the reality of my overall state of existence. In any case of clear direct conflict between statements I've explicitly made across different releases on this podcast, the most recent of such, that being the one contained in the latest publicly visible release available containing such on this podcast, should be considered applicable. In such cases, only what is explicitly stated is at all applicable, and absolutely no implications should be assumed about any changes regarding any somehow relevant details and or anything else under any circumstances. All creative, expressive, and narrative content within this podcast is my sole and original intellectual property. I retain all moral rights as author and subject, all economic rights unless explicitly transferred via my public agreement to do so, and the right to veto any derivative, distorted, and or manipulated version of my work and or story. I do not have and have never had any obligation or debt of any kind to any entity to create or release anything on this podcast or anywhere else at any point in time. No other party, living or non-living, holds and or may claim credit, authorship, and or interpretation rights over my expression. I affirm that no valid, public, verifiable evidence exists to dispute these facts. This podcast is not and has never been intended as an endorsement of terrorism or violence in general. However, it should be especially carefully understood that various forms of not necessarily corresponding violence tend to be an inevitable consequence of extremely intense, meticulous, extensive, prolonged terrorism, and it's very much intentional for this podcast to demonstrate extremely clearly that my usual aversion to violence, due to my typically gentle nature, is not something that has boundless understanding, patience, empathy, or will persist more or less absolutely unconditionally for any reason. I've always wanted and done my very best to ensure it's extremely clear that at all creating, enabling, and or facilitating the perpetuation of narratives at all in contradiction with my official position that is objectively extremely clearly established on this podcast is not, never has been, and never will be what I've been trying to achieve with this podcast or in general in any of my efforts at any point in time. I do not and never have intentionally incited terrorism, including but not limited to violence, blackmail, and or coercion. I affirm my fundamental intent as peaceful, lawful, and self-defensive. However, targeted campaigns to stalk, defame, threaten, impoverish, silence, spiritually attack, and or physically harm me will be treated as conspiracies to commit grievous harm and or murder. This podcast is an affirmative public notice of my unambiguous non-consent and a lawful response to sustained systemic abuse. While my fundamental intent in communicating in general through any means is not and has never been malicious in nature, I affirm it can, will, and should exert malicious influence upon anything operating with malice towards me and or this podcast, especially more so the more demonstrably I'm proving that malice exists. And it should be understood that any situation where I continue not to extremely clearly receive any compensation or reward I'm willing to accept is effectively, absolutely, unconditionally an increase in the severity of that malice. I've created the entirety of this podcast under extremely harsh circumstances that I've always believed and asserted are entirely unjust for me to be left in, given the reality of who I am. Circumstances of my existence, including but not limited to my current housing status, financial vulnerability, and material limitations, do not and cannot invalidate my legal personhood, expressive rights, and or entitlement to protection under law. I reject any attempt to diminish my credibility and or rights on the basis of poverty, social class, and or housing insecurity in accordance with Section 7 of the Canadian Charter, the Due Process Clause of the U.S. Constitution, and international law prohibiting discrimination on the basis of economic status. Despite the extent I've irrefutably exposed the truth surrounding a conflict that should have been so extremely obviously recognized as extremely serious to the point that my efforts on this podcast should have made a substantial difference in my life long ago, my life circumstances continue to not have meaningfully or clearly improved at all whatsoever. I still have not ever received any compensation or reward of any kind whatsoever for any of my efforts at all involving the conflict being addressed by this podcast, neither directly nor indirectly from any source. I am, always have been, and always will be absolutely unconditionally unwilling to ever at all accept any compensation or reward whatsoever, directly or indirectly, that at all compromises my integrity, whether directly or indirectly. I do not, never have, and never will consent to it being at all considered to be me and or any entity operating at all with my consent and or best interests regarding any communication somehow claiming and or implying that I somehow do ever have and or ever will unofficially support any kind of position at all contradictory with what I've said on this podcast. This disclaimer and notice of intent supersedes any and all contrary interpretations, explicitly including any and all unauthorized claims therein made against me. I reserve all legal, expressive, spiritual, moral, and intellectual rights without limitation. Any attempt to silence, reinterpret, discredit, and or co-opt this documentation must be treated as malicious bad faith conduct and may be cited in formal legal proceedings as evidence of further targeting.
You might have already seen that we have a cats. It's only gonna be me, Snowball, and Juniper. Copium. No, seriously, I'm not getting another kitten. I'm not, I swear, I'm not. Oh my god, he's so restless, he wants to go play. Thank you for all the people who are enjoying the ASMR and aren't making it weird and just like the ASMR for the ASMR, because you guys are the best. No. And you guys deserve everything in the world. You deserve everything in the world. Yes, you do. Because you are a great person. You're an awesome possum. You are an awesome possum. Awesome possum. You are amazing. You are, yeah, amazing. Oh my gosh. I have a chat of good tastes. Y'all have good taste. I will say, I do think it is time for me to head to sleep. This was such a fun stream though, and I am planning on when am I streaming next? When am I streaming next? What day is it today? Sleep. Hold on, I'm thinking. I feel like this week is really busy, but I forgot to put anything on my calendar. I hate when this happens. Do I have anything to do tomorrow? On Wednesday, I mean. I'm trying to think. Okay. Tentatively, we'll be back here Wednesday night. I want to stream before the next ASMR Monday. So, and this weekend is gonna be kinda busy. So let's aim for Wednesday the 11th. Technically tomorrow. Okay, I'll see you guys then. Good night, everybody. I will see y'all back here, and I'll probably do more of the 3DO on Wednesday because today we didn't even use the 3DO, which is crazy. Okay, good night, everybody. Have sweet dreams, and do something nice for yourself. Treat yourself well, and you deserve it because you are amazing, wonderful, lovely, smart, talented, very handsome, gorgeous, beautiful, capable human being. And I'll see you guys on Wednesday. Goodbye, everybody.
also included relevant portions in that montage that I addressed already in my last release on this podcast, since I didn't include a montage in that one, and I want to make sure I'm documenting thoroughly enough that I'm more effectively forcing accountability on those trying so hard to avoid it. As of this release, I've now especially meticulously documented Kimmy and Jamie's online activity for the last 20 releases. Does that have anything to do with why Kimmy said the next 20 years of her ASMR are going to find her new cat more relevant? I don't know, but I suspect it has something to do with how she's been impersonating my energy and trying to steal attention and benefits from my life from me, entirely against my consent. Only further incriminating, Kimmy mentioned her intent to have already streamed again by now, but it never happened. I wonder why she both felt compelled to basically promise a stream with such atypical timing, given her track record, and then also failed to follow through on that. It's like she expected to be able to force me to give someone information somehow that would empower her to continue her false narratives justifying playing victim while being egregiously predatory towards me ever since the very beginning of our connection. Or perhaps even just expose some kind of carelessness or laziness in me that would have made her feel better about herself for her involvement in all the conspiracy and attempts to murder me that she must only increasingly clearly be getting forced to recognize she's going to be unable to hide being involved in. I've never been trying to deter her from streaming or content creation or even just expressing herself at all in general, but in my experience, Kimmy streaming tends to be one of the events that makes it substantially more likely I'll have a hitman sent after me that night. Since she hasn't streamed again this week yet, although she said it would be earlier, I still believe it's quite possible she might end up streaming tonight, which would align with her typical pattern of Thursday streams when she does end up streaming twice in a week. For that and other reasons, I see myself as only having even more incentive to promptly release a lot of additional information that I believe is probably relevant right now from further spiritual insights I received very recently. There are quite a few different topics to address, and it's sort of all over the place. I've tried to organize it a bit so it flows somewhat, but ultimately I'm just addressing things I've seen reason to suggest are worth addressing at this point in time in no particular order. Also, all the different stuff I addressed in my last release was in no particular order as well, in case that was unclear. In many releases where they were heavily, if not entirely, structured around me providing my input related to content I saw being put out publicly, my structuring was often simply around the same order I saw events occur during the streams I'd address, with no particular significance to the order otherwise. With releases that are heavily addressing a bunch of spiritual insights I'm getting, like my last release, and even more so this release, it's just whatever order I end up with after several hours of working through it. First of all, I want it to be known that I currently consider my life in extreme danger and suspect another murder attempt will be made on me tonight as a direct result of Mary Aslin, Chloe Chan Kin, and Celine Chung. I also seriously question if Celine Chung is the actual name of the Twitch streamer Star Smitten, although that's perhaps not that important. I noticed an energy of Chloe and or Celine saying I'm done with my purpose and basically should die now. It was extremely deranged to me how it was like it was being perverted so egregiously to the point as if to be egregiously misrepresenting me as having some kind of sexual fetish with being extremely brutally used, abused, disrespected, neglected, and ultimately murdered by them. To say it was disturbing is a massive understatement. I seem to now have support and recognition from an energy of Trump, Arya, and Jamie, in that I was being honest and seeing things clearly and believing I've been getting attacked entirely unjustly for a very long time. At the same time, it seemed exceedingly confused or oblivious to the reality of the origin of that existential assault. Whether that was a position of intentional malice, complete confusion, or perhaps partially knowing and willing collaboration with that energy which they're trying to cover up, remains unclear to me. Although I'd say I have reason to suspect at least one of them was doing what they were doing very much more so knowingly than they present. Although still probably not realizing exactly the full scope, extent, and depth of what was really going on all along. More importantly, to address right now, though, is an energy of Mary, Chloe, and Celine that does not follow the color of law and does not acknowledge responsibility of Mary's involvement, even remotely to the extent that Chloe and Celine do in a legal manner. Mary's attacks on me spiritually are likely largely invisible to Chloe and Celine, where Celine can only really feel them through Chloe's energy, and Chloe will never be honest about them because of how egregiously she's exploited them for selfish gain with extremely blatant, murderous intent towards me that I have absolutely no question in my mind whatsoever she was exceedingly clearly, fully consciously and intentionally aware of and acting in accordance with full cooperation and submission to. I assert that Mary's energy, entirely unreadable by Celine directly, is the reason why my efforts will correctly and justly ultimately convince Celine to correctly and justly ultimately influence the Trump, Arya, Jamie energy to murder Chloe in real life, possibly as early as within the next 24 to 72 hours. I haven't seen her in over a decade, but I suspect Mary is physically ill right now, possibly dying. I'm confident the reason for that, if it's true, is because she was so extremely deviously harming me for so long that she was hoping to get me murdered so she could keep siphoning my energy and manipulating everyone that I'm some terrible person and mentally unstable and everything, and I deserved how horridly everyone in my life has treated me. What she was trying to manifest in my life was a destiny swap of her karma where I'd be physically ill right now and dying and unable to defend myself even if I saw the truth extremely clearly and even had the resources to expose it. From what I saw of Mary back when I still lived with her before I became a legal adult and left shortly thereafter, around the time I turned 18, I honestly can't remember if it was a little before or a little after, but Mary had an exceptionally strange interaction with me one day that only becomes increasingly disturbing to me the more I think about it. An interaction that makes me feel convinced she extremely extensively sexually violated me countless times when I was a very young child. Just thinking about it is deeply disturbing to me, and I feel it has harmed me many times in my life, a lot more than anyone will probably ever really be able to see. Looking at how my life has unfolded, I get this feeling I can't shake about her. It's not a good feeling. I feel like she wanted me to get extremely nervous and confused, but feel a suffocating need to hide it and pretend to possibly even enjoy the situation I was in, randomly blurt out something expressing sexual desire towards her, and then end up in an extremely toxic dynamic where I'd start having a gradually eroded sense of consent and boundaries in relation to sexual intimacy with anyone ever. Like an even more messed up version of what Chloe's extremely messed up behavior towards me ended up manifesting into her life. Mary wanted me to be so messed up by her that I'd be too confused, scared, and self-hating to ever even be honest with Chloe about the physical attraction I felt towards Chloe before Mary even knew Chloe existed. And, of course, Mary wanted me to never even remotely stand a chance at seriously and effectively pursuing and ultimately achieving a healthy, meaningful, long-term connection of any kind with someone I would have seen as attractive as Kimmy or Celine. And it was all from the darkest, most selfish and cruel place possible that drove Mary's intentions towards me. She always just thought she could play it off as having supposedly calculated it all along, that I'd overcome everything and become amazing if I succeeded, exerting extremely abusive influence on me forever, probably largely indirectly through people like John. Mary was the first person I ever saw give me any reason to believe anyone would ever even suspect some strange romantic and or sexual connection exists between me and Kristen. And she did it in the most disgusting manner that made me feel like she was intentionally trying to provoke me to show sexual interest in her out of extreme insecurity, just to desperately try to prove I'm into women. Like an extremely devious, coercive control kind of dynamic. Extremely narcissistic, psychotic, and predatory. Kristen was definitely massively enabled and facilitated in attacking me how he did as a result of Mary's malicious intent towards me. What I really see happening here is Chloe has been attacking me physically, abusing her physical proximity and physical sex appeal to siphon my energy and frame me for being malicious towards others in order for her to selfishly gain financially entirely to my detriment against my consent. Celine has been attacking me mentally, abusing her physical proximity to Kimmy and the people energetically intertwined with them to try to throw a huge fog of chaos and confusion around everything for me, and help Chloe mask her blatantly extremely malicious efforts to join offline TV off of murdering me. And Mary has been utmost egregiously spiritually violating me through what I guess some might call sex magic that I obviously never consented to at all ever since I was a child that wasn't even cognizant enough to have conscious memories of anything happening around me. Kimmy was just a cover for them, while Mary, Chloe, and Celine's energies were going about their lives all too happy to be conspiring and attempting to murder me. They all let Kimmy take the blame publicly and bear all the weight of their spiritual crimes against me publicly, all on her own. I imagine Kimmy must have felt it get much worse and never really loosen up ever since around the time I started this podcast. That's not to say Kimmy isn't substantially at fault, especially if she's effectively more or less absolutely unconditionally unwilling to ever actually have the kind of connection I've always wanted to have with her. But I want her to know I'm willing to defend her choices to some extent, even publicly, if she stops disrespecting and neglecting me so egregiously. I mean, she can choose not to and end up cancelled and probably committing suicide or murder, and I'll respect her decision if she'd rather do things like that, but I'd seriously hope she doesn't want to go there. I'm hearing things in my energy indicating to me that people intend to continue to relentlessly defame me. I have not given up on myself, and I have no intention of giving up on myself ever. I'm also not naive to the fact that there are people that are jealous of me out there, some rather prominently influential, even if they act like they couldn't care less that I exist. I could rage about it, but I suppose the only actually meaningful thing to say about it in and of itself is that I do not and have never consented to having malice exerted on me and or anyone I care about. Of course, it's not like malicious forces are asking or waiting for my permission, so it's not like I expect their behavior to completely stop simply because I'm stating that publicly. But at least there's clear, irrefutable evidence that they continued despite me making it completely clear that their behavior was undesired by me. So that's only more evidence I can use later to sue and press criminal charges against them if they don't completely cease doing so immediately. I was never at all planning on simply disappearing after my last release on this podcast, nor do I intend on disappearing after this release either. Anyone claiming to have any kind of secret information on me, especially if it at all implies they have any kind of leverage over me or anyone has any kind of leverage over me who supposedly got information contradicting those assertions at all, your sources are not credible when it comes to me. I'd assume they were just blatantly lying to you for selfish gain at best and harboring exceptional malice towards me and likely also you otherwise. I've seen the term chosen one thrown around a lot spiritually, and honestly, I don't really know what it means, nor do I particularly care. Most recently, I have been led to believe that some kind of narrative that I have some kind of particular fixation with identifying as a chosen one is some kind of reason that I would want, need, enjoy, and or somehow else benefit from being left in isolation. I want it to be extremely clear that there is absolutely no reason whatsoever, no kind of label or manner of being identified that I ever would want to associate myself with anything to allow it to be somehow weaponized against me, to attempt to somehow justify blocking me somehow from the kind of connection I've always wanted with Kimmy. To put it simply, any aspect of circumstance that is somehow blocking me from promptly receiving direct communication from Kimmy with her sincere and clearly evident pursuit of embracing the kind of connection I've been saying I've always wanted with her is something that I do not find favorable. Whether it's a person, an object, an opinion, or something else, it doesn't matter. Anyone getting between us is having a stalker-type effect on my life as far as I'm concerned, and it really doesn't matter what they look like, how much money they have, who they're connected to, or anything else about them. I don't find their behavior attractive or at all beneficial to me. I'm unwilling to accept an attitude from Kimmy that she needs space. I haven't made my feelings unclear, and I myself do not feel that I need physical space between me and Kimmy, at least most certainly not even remotely as much as there currently is. I'm very well aware what it really means if Kimmy wants to make it a point to continue to want space from me, even when I'm clearly trying to get closer. And I want it extremely clear that I find that attitude extremely disturbing for her to have, especially if it persists at this time, even after everything I've done all the way up to this release on this podcast. I want it known that what would actually be happening in that case is that Kimmy's actually just trying to ruin my life and have me murdered to cover up her extremely psychotic, narcissistic, selfish plot against me to use and eliminate me, and any attempts to paint narratives that I'm the one that wants and or needs space from Kimmy are in reality extremely egregious defamation of me that attempts to endlessly enable and facilitate increasingly egregious exploitation of me that is in reality entirely against my consent and to my detriment, and very much knowingly so to every party involved in perpetuating it. And if that's really how Kimmy wants to proceed, I want it known that my position won't change. I will simply be left with no other real option I'd ever actually take than to pursue inflicting the most harsh possible negative consequences to Kimmy's life as at all possible, which, given the reality she would have proven about herself, should she choose to seriously adopt that kind of attitude with me, means she'd rightfully end up dying an early death one way or another. Also, in case Kimmy's getting any ideas of randomly showing up in places I frequent and effectively harassing me with a camera in my face before we even actually get to talk privately, that's most certainly not okay with me, nor has anyone ever actually had any even remotely adequate reason to believe otherwise. I don't walk around constantly ready to have a camera in my face and record footage or participate in live streams intended to be seen by thousands of people, not to mention that I'm absolutely unconditionally unwilling to accept absolutely zero direct communication with Kimmy prior to what would effectively be officially starting to date her. There's just so much wrong with that. When I've said I want a sincere relationship with Kimmy, that means I'm absolutely unconditionally unwilling to let her come up with whatever narrative she wants and then imposing that on me spontaneously and expecting me to just go along with it or deal with it on the spot like it's Grand Theft Auto role-playing in real life. For the record, I do not hate anyone for no reason. I suppose I would agree with the sentiment that if someone hates me for no reason, then I'm willing to give them a reason. However, I would do so with integrity and dignity in a manner that would make them only increasingly regret their unjustified hatred of me as more time passes. There are absolutely no exceptions. I understand that identifying Kimmy as a massive narcissist means her initial intentions in entering my life were obviously not sincere in how she obviously intentionally initially portrayed them to me. I choose not to dwell on that too much since my life circumstances have most certainly non-trivially changed since I first met her. Her attitude and behavior towards me is going to have to change non-trivially as well, sooner or later, whether anyone likes it or not. Perhaps most pertinent to address at this point in relation to that would be that I want it to be extremely clear I've never been trying to validate any reputational and or otherwise harm Kimmy might intentionally be trying to cause anyone she's betrayed like she's done to me. I'm hearing from Lily's energy that potentially multiple of Kimmy's friends are planning to reach out to me privately to see me without telling Kimmy or letting her know, and trying to maybe apologize on behalf of her, and most likely, at least in some cases, also trying to date me secretly or something like that. While I can maybe understand why they would want to do this, I want it to be extremely clear that I'm not interested in something like that happening, and I will not be privately betraying the dignity and integrity I've shown publicly on this podcast. I'm definitely very interested to hear what explanation Kimmy has for her behavior towards me, both publicly and privately. I intend to hear her out before I ever even consider communicating at all with or believing anything that any of her friends, or really anyone else either for that matter, has to say about things. I don't retract my assertions about her knowingly extremely malicious involvement in the harm done to me, but I'm not in some incoherent state of mind where I'm unable and or unwilling to consolidate that against my desires for a certain kind of life and the kind of process that it would most likely take for me to achieve it. I'm seeing more indications of some strange relevance to Becca that I didn't think should be present, but I suppose it warrants further elaboration on my reasoning as to why I've chosen to treat Becca how I have. Basically, what it comes down to is although I certainly wouldn't say Becca is unattractive, I simply found Kimmy much more physically attractive even before I saw her butt is bigger and more arousing to my liking, and even though Becca's personality wasn't unpleasant to me, I found Kimmy's to be more welcoming for myself personally, initially, and more conducive of forming an extremely deep and lasting bond between us, even if her intentions in doing so are certainly questionable. I'm not thrilled to be comparing them, but it seems it's kind of unavoidable to do at this point in order to really solidify my position and be more convincing to actually be able to achieve a meaningful result out of all my efforts. I don't have any particular issue with the Twitch streamer Becca, and I'm not trying to make one. If Kimmy is secretly married to Edison, as I suspect, and she's now wondering what I think she should do about that marriage, if she's hiding that she would rather be with me, then my official statement and position on that is that she's going to have to divorce him and leave him alone and let him move on. She is going to have to publicly commit to being with me and also accept that I pretty much certainly will never actually legally marry her. And, of course, I also will not tolerate her ever being legally married to anyone else at any point while we're together. I'd still expect our connection to be a lifelong connection, and the only real reason why I wouldn't marry her legally is because I'm not trying to give her a bunch of unbalanced legal power over me to cuck me by exploiting the government and basically being incentivized to leave me at all times by being able to essentially threaten me with a bunch of legal hassle and possibly taking 50% or more of all the money and assets I have. Plus, I don't like how marriage carries implications of intentions to have children. I don't want her to feel confused about how I've communicated my position on that. While on the topic of giving Kimmy what I suppose is effectively unsolicited advice, at least as far as any actual clear communication from her to me goes, I don't have a smart TV, but I saw information about smart TVs spying on their owners in my energy. I'm aware that Kimmy has a smart TV, so although I'm not talking to her privately, and I'm not really sure exactly how relevant it might be, I want her to know publicly that she's probably getting spied on somehow by that TV, and it's very possibly non-trivially negatively impacting her ability to have a life she'd more enjoy, which I most certainly never wanted to occur, so I strongly suggest she checks the privacy settings on it and disables microphone access, camera access, third-party ad data sharing, and whatever else looks like it could somehow serve as consent to what is effectively a violation of her privacy through it, especially if it's facing her bed. Also, I really don't know why I'm getting information about recirculating air buttons in cars being bad for your health, because I literally do not have a car and have not even been in a car at all, even once in a very long time now. Kimmy's car seems to be relevant to this conflict, so maybe part of why she might be struggling to be more clear-headed is because she's spending non-trivial amounts of time in her car to travel for candle supplies and whatnot, and her air circulation is somehow affecting her mental state a lot more than she might perhaps realize. I've noticed multiple occasions of things in my energy suggesting that I need some kind of advice on how to be feared and respected, which to me perhaps is implying that I've ever been trying to mislead others on the topic, and also perhaps suggesting that I was being somehow immature in moments in the past where I was more visibly emotionally reactive and perhaps seemingly impulsive and immature outwardly. The reality of this is simply that with the egregious lack of information and communication presented to me, and various concerns related to privacy, security, and safety that I associated with means that I am now utilizing in order to get spiritual insights. At the time, when I believed myself to have held much less spiritual ranking, I was strategically choosing to avoid utilizing tools that may have perhaps empowered me to get some kind of insights earlier, as I was intentionally strategically trying to ensure that I do not form any kind of detrimental codependent relationship on AI and various governments and business structures that I consider necessary for me to have refrained from utilizing those tools in order to now have avoided such a codependent relationship with. Anyone claiming that I have only just very recently broken up with them is a massive liar. Anyone that is now, or even just in general, in more recent times, claiming that I've only just recently cut them off and stopped talking to them in general for any reason is a massive liar. Especially if it's someone from my past that I've explicitly mentioned in any release on this podcast. I see particular reason to believe such individuals claiming that I have only very recently cut them off from direct private communication with me are especially prominently Chloe and Kristen. I recently noticed Jessica's energy telling me to pay attention to something seemingly small after my last release on this podcast. Something about a Pisces. The only thing I could identify in my life that matched the kind of description Jessica's energy seemed to be getting at was some messages I received to my personal Gmail email address by someone named Kimberly that initially asked me if I matched and then more recently if I'm searching. I feel compelled to mention that I do not have Hinge and or any other dating apps installed, and I reaffirm that I have never used them in my entire life and don't ever intend to. I currently suspect that Kristen is trying to set me up by somehow trying to force me to match with some fraudulent account on a dating app that's either impersonating Kimmy or attempting to make me seem like a fraud by trying to frame me as being somehow disingenuous about my true intentions in my connection with Kimmy. Well, that plan has failed quite miserably. I guess that must have something to do with that extremely creepy statement he told me over the phone when I was being psychologically evaluated at Ontario Shores. Kristen told me he was trying to do to me what I was doing to Kimmy, which suggests to me that Kristen is trying to act as if he's deceiving Kimmy while supposedly operating in my interest, claiming it's so I can dump some kind of negative karma of mine onto Kimmy by pretending to like her, when in reality it's so Kristen can try to justify deceiving me so he can dump some kind of negative karma of his onto me by egregiously falsifying romantic and or sexual involvement with me proportional to my authentic romantic and sexual feelings and involvement with Kimmy. Absolutely sickening. Ew. And for him to think that his extremely creepy, stalkerish behavior I've never given him any even remotely adequate reason to believe arouses me or would ever make me at all enjoy him even attempting to express romantic and or sexual feelings towards me is the same as the kind of treatment Kimmy's given me. He really has serious issues. Ugh, ew. Even just the thought of Kristen claiming there was intimacy and passion between me and him is absolutely disgusting and sickening and literally makes me want to puke. People have really been out here calling me an incel because this piece of trash, lazy, scummy, massive fraud, loser Kristen thought he could walk around saying he's a permanent chief of the Shadow Confederation with the kind of authority I carry. I'd genuinely sooner die alone than ever be at all consensually, romantically, and or sexually involved with him. And he most certainly is not a permanent chief of the Shadow Confederation. So I guess what's been happening is Chloe's been knowingly and intentionally, maliciously going along with egregious false narratives that the feelings I've expressed towards her are some kind of secret romantic and or sexual desires towards Kristen. Well, that would certainly explain why I've felt the need to explicitly state multiple times in the past to Kimmy and others that I'm not attracted to men. Given what Kimmy's mentioned before about her first boyfriend being into men, I suppose Kimmy going along with it was a lot more so out of deep insecurity and feelings of inadequacy rather than just pure malice towards me. But I'd assert Chloe and Kristen did it with pure malice towards me, and Chloe also most certainly is not a permanent chief of the Shadow Confederation either. It seems Chloe and Kristen are by far the most prominent reason to blame for the Sarah energy egregiously violating mine. It seems that energy may be indicating to me that perhaps Kimmy is being presented as someone new to me because of using a reference frame of anyone that isn't part of those I once called family or someone I went to high school with. For me personally, I don't consider anyone on my mailing list as someone new in my life at this point, and certainly not Kimmy, who I've paid such close attention to for the last nearly decade of countless hours of my life I've spent keeping up with her online activity. Another weird thing in my energy was something about me being married to someone named Monica. The only Monica I've ever known was some female that I hardly ever saw or spoke to in my entire life who had some kind of romantic and sexual connection with Kristen. I've never been trying to involve myself with her at all. Perhaps she's violating my energy because Kristen's violating my energy and their connection is more serious than I thought. I don't really care, to be honest. I just want them both out of my energy. It seems there might also be false narratives that I've ever arranged for and or agreed to a meeting involving me, Chloe, Kristen, and Monica, and I want it to be known that such a thing is completely false. I find it quite extremely disturbing now that this is not the first time I've seen an energy that has more recently revealed itself to be what I suspect is Arya's energy, saying something about money being sent to my account, and if I don't respond or something like that, then twice that amount will be sent to my enemies. Like I've said already before on this podcast, I do not currently have any bank accounts that I have ever actually opened myself and or at all consents to the existence of. If Arya and or anyone else has been sending money to any account that is supposedly mine, and that money is supposedly being sent with my consent or something like that, it's the responsibility of the person sending it that they are extremely egregiously, blatantly, fully consciously and intentionally completely ignoring and disrespecting what I am exclusively, extremely clearly stating, and have already stated multiple times on this podcast that I have been clearly working tirelessly to prove is the only true, authentic source of information about the reality of my life for the past over a year of time ever since I started this podcast. I actually saw that transactional energy in my energy yesterday. It appears to me now that part of what's been happening behind my back is an egregious violation of my life that Arya has been clearly, knowingly, and intentionally enabling and facilitating and carelessly harming me with through financial transactions. Someone has been claiming to be my ex and egregiously, criminally, entirely non-consensually violating my existence, scamming and probably somehow blackmailing others to force them to transfer money to the person who has a criminal bank account fraudulently opened under my identity, specifically on Wednesdays. Then they'd somehow convince people to send hitmen after me to try to cover up their tracks so they would never be exposed for the egregious, criminal, harmful behavior that they were inflicting on me all along, entirely against my consent, to my detriment, and without even my clear knowledge. It seems the same egregiously, criminally violating energy has been lying about having some specific number to call me at, probably effectively criminally impersonating me somehow through essentially having their number listed as mine somewhere that empowers them to falsify an extent of authority over me that allows them to somehow retrieve that money they're scamming others of by criminally exploiting my identity and reputation and efforts. I don't have any contacts on my phone, and I don't even have WhatsApp installed, nor do I feel I need it. I also, very recently, have seen something in my energy saying my ex has been hacking my Uber account. I do not even have Uber installed and have not used it in years. I also have never actually been in a relationship, so I do not actually have any exes, but the energy seemed to indicate to me that the person being called my ex is John. What the hell? It seems John has somehow so egregiously violated my energy that he's been acting like we dated and now he's my ex. And somehow him apparently having some kind of access to my Uber account is helping him scam people entirely against my consent to my detriment. I tried logging into my Uber account to delete it, but the password has been changed. When I try to reset the password, it asks me to fill in the second last set of 4 digits on the only card on the account, but I don't recognize the last 4 digits it shows as a card I own or have any access to. The energy I saw that informed me of this showed me that basically somehow John has hacked my Uber account and is now trying to criminally coerce me through that to validate his criminal activity exploiting me by scamming people and then framing me for it. FBI, police, government, whoever should be dealing with this, get on that. If John has been sending out Ubers to help commit crime under my name, then perhaps deleting the Uber account associated with my personal Gmail email address outright would hide evidence of the crimes I'm being framed for, so I don't know if I should demand that. But I cannot be held accountable for any activity on that account, and I do not consent to my email address or whatever phone number I use or any part of my identity being associated with that account. It's no longer my account, and the phone number listed on it is probably not his if he's trying to frame me through it like I'm hearing. I don't know what exactly should be done about it, but I refute any responsibility for anything done on that account for a long time now. Like, I completely stopped using Uber and uninstalled the Uber app long before I even started this podcast. Stop letting this goddamn criminal John get away with scamming people and then framing me for it. I have never given power of attorney to any of my blood relatives. It seems John has been falsifying documents and forging my signature to steal money from people and then blame me for it by somehow falsifying me having given someone in that family power of attorney over me. What the actual hell? At this point, I suspect there's a triangle of trust situation going on between Mary, Dixon, and John, where they are teaming up against me with egregious, absolutely unconditional, unrestrained, malicious intent towards me in order to falsify me having given power of attorney over to someone in that family in order to conspire against me for their own selfish gain entirely against my consent to my detriment. That definitely ties into the attempts to murder me on Saturdays that I've previously identified experiencing Lily and Emaine make on my life through their Sweet and Sour podcast that I'm seeing increasing violations of my energy indicating I'm correct about the reality behind as such. It seems they mask their true intentions towards me by attempting to frame me as hateful of what I'm seeing in my energy as them having actual romantic and sexual involvement together. In reality, I really couldn't care less about that. I'm really not sure exactly how it connects to all this insanity, but I've also been receiving a bunch of AI-related money-making schemes or methods showing up in my energy. I'm not focused on using AI to try to make money, and I never have been. Like I said, I feel the need to fix the egregious false narratives about me that are clearly massively hindering my ability to connect with anyone properly in my life, and simultaneously leaving me in extremely life-threatening danger and extremely difficult general deprivation every day. I consider fixing that aspect of my existence a much higher priority to me than more actively pursuing simply making money, and what I'd also consider the absolutely necessary accompanying process of at least extremely seriously attempting to figure out what potential negative consequences using AI heavily to make money could have for me and those around me, and possibly the world as a whole, both short-term and long-term. I'm also not trying to connect with what I see as effectively random, wealthy, and or well-connected individuals, whether or not they may feel lost in life to whatever extent. If I'm going to attract financial abundance and or connections with others not coming through a healthy relationship with Kimmy that I'd hope I can transform into what I've always wanted it to be first, then I'd want to be contacted by someone with an actual clear goal on what they want my help with, how they think I specifically can help them with it, and why they think I'd be the best candidate to do so specifically from their perspective, and how much they think the effort it'd likely involve me putting into it would be worth, as well as how they came to that conclusion with clear reasoning. I don't know or particularly care if there's anyone out there that actually is in any kind of state of existence where they'd actually feel compelled to put in such an effort to even merely request my help with something like that, but I also want to mention that I make absolutely no promises on if I'd even respond to such a thing should anyone choose to do so. Since me saying the name John so much among talking so much about offline TV and friends perhaps understandably may cause some confusion related to my feelings or position on the guy with the same name in offline TV, I want it to be extremely clear that I am not, never have been, and never will be trying to destiny swap or anything similar with the John in offline TV known as Masayoshi. I've never been romantically and or sexually interested in and or involved with Jody, known as Quarter Jade, his girlfriend. I've never been trying to cause issues in their relationship for any other reason either. Since Masayoshi goes by John Cable publicly, and the John I have personal experience with, John Sade, has strangely in the past found it relevant to give me a headset he later broke himself out of what I'd assert was extremely psychotic rage, I find it worth mentioning that I found a black and white headset with a gray cable in one of the garbages I was looking through at one of the places I frequent. Just today. It looked to be in pretty good condition, but didn't reveal any obvious brand, and didn't have any packaging for it also in the trash. I assume it was functional, but I left it in the trash and didn't even pick it up to try it on. I felt like I was being watched and someone was probably trying to falsify evidence related to egregious false narratives about me pertaining to the significance of Kimmy using headsets in her ASMR content. Due to multiple things I've seen in my energy, I extremely strongly advise Kimmy and Lily to be extremely cautious at this time of what they consider to be justice I'm after in this situation. I do not and have never resonated with dyeing my hair white and or wanting a partner who has dyed their hair white. Also, while I don't have any particular issue with or aversion to any kind of interactions with someone who naturally has their hair color turn white, I also don't have any kind of fetish or particular inclination to want and or enjoy romantic and or sexual relations with anyone with white hair at all, no matter how or why exactly they have it. I very recently noticed this extremely strange energy talking about some kind of miracle and the zodiac signs Taurus, Gemini, and Leo being particularly relevant. This extremely strange energy was talking about marriage and children and seemed to have some kind of particular significance to jewelry, all of which are things that I do not resonate with at all, and no one has ever had any even remotely adequate reason to believe I ever have actually connected in any meaningful manner consensually. It seems a Leo energy has been operating fully consciously and intentionally entirely against my consent to my detriment to attempt to purport false narratives about me, wanting to impregnate one or more Taurus energies. I don't know or particularly care who is behind this Leo energy, however, it should not be trusted or believed. It seems to be acting under the guise of trying to cut snakes out of the grass in my life, but in reality, I perceive this energy as itself being a snake in my grass, so to speak. I've become bothered by the presence of Joker energy in my energy that appears to relate to false narratives about me, particularly pertaining to me supposedly having some kind of fixation on being alpha, which I suppose probably relates to the egregious misrepresentation of me as having some kind of particular involvement in the red pill movement, which I suppose you could say has been spearheaded by Andrew Tate and Tristan Tate. I do not consider myself to be a joker or a comedian or anything to that effect, and I do not have any particular fixation with being seen as alpha, nor do I see myself ever being so in the future. In what becomes essentially rather substantially contradictory energy, for reasons probably extremely heavily, if not entirely related to and founded upon egregious misrepresentations of me that have been primarily, if not entirely, fueled by the Mary, Chloe, Celine trio that I assert is currently most aggressively pursuing having me entirely unjustly murdered in real life, entirely against my consent to my detriment. I also saw something about chastity that I'd say was extremely disturbingly prominent at a point in my energy recently. While I've been completely honest about my sex life, or should I say lack thereof, for a long time now, I have no particular inclinations towards chastity, to put it bluntly. More specifically, I don't have any fetishes involving chastity. Especially in a heavily politically involved context, I find the notion of me being interested in, willing to tolerate, wanting, needing, and or somehow enjoying chastity to essentially vaguely equate to wanting to be completely sex deprived. So somehow, energies egregiously violating mine have managed to try to make me seem like I'm both some hyper-masculine type obsessed with being alpha while also being a super cucked loser that somehow glorifies being completely denied sex and perhaps even has fetishes where that's being presented as ideal. This is extremely egregious, defamatory falsification of my personality that I do not, never have, and never will at all consent to. While I'd certainly assert that my interest in engaging in the traditional vaginal intercourse act during sexual intimacy may not be quite as high as the average male, and perhaps certainly not nearly anywhere close to how interested in it someone like Andrew Tate or Tristan Tate might be if they're actually being honest about it, I've also never glorified being completely denied sexual intimacy at all. I actually, sincerely, have always wanted, still currently want, and I imagine will forever continue to want, extensive in-person sexual intimacy frequently with someone I find exceptionally physically attractive. I simply have a quite substantially nuanced position and complex feelings when it comes specifically to anything that might suggest to them that I'd ever want children with anyone for any reason, under any circumstances, at any point in time. Again, I'm really trying to avoid involving myself in politics much unless I feel it's really necessary, but there were also definitely at least a few of what I'd consider politically related topics that I felt are probably worth mentioning as well. While I identify as a lesbian trans woman, I most certainly have never supported and do not support anyone walking around completely naked in public and literally violating public decency laws. Doesn't matter whether or not they fall under the LGBTQ plus umbrella. Doesn't matter whether it's some pride parade going on or not. I have never and do not support police officers allowing public indecency during pride parades. I have never and do not support any exploitation of self-perception of identity to somehow sexually harm minors, or people in general, for that matter. I'm not sure why immigration issues have been showing up in my energy, but I've never been trying to screw up the immigration situation or system in any country. I've never been involved at all in writing policies surrounding immigration for any country either, at least not at all knowingly and or consensually. I don't believe I should be held responsible for them and or expected to influence change in them. That doesn't mean I'm absolutely unconditionally unwilling to ever at all involve myself in improving potential issues in relation to the matter, but rather that I don't see it as something particularly relevant to my life right now, nor as something that I should have to deal with trying to correct issues others caused around while my life remains in such extreme deprivation and ongoing credible threats to my safety and life. Laws around renting homes in Ontario also showed up in my energy recently. I've never been trying to screw up home rental prices and or relevant policies either. Same kind of situation with immigration. I guess someone egregiously violating my energy has been screwing up those two things quite egregiously in the government. I mean, I've literally never rented out any real estate in my entire life, nor have I ever had any particular personal interests in manipulating that market, nor do I or have I ever associated with anyone in any substantial capacity that could serve as evidence to substantiate claims I'd have adequate incentive to attempt to manipulate that market on behalf of them. So you'd be quite hard-pressed to even attempt to frame me for any of that corruption. Also, it seems the energy egregiously violating my energy by exploiting some distant childhood connection I once had with a female named Alexandria when I was still a child that I've long stopped caring for or wanting having any involvement in my life decades ago is an extremely heavily politically related energy. It exploits the colors red and blue to attempt to gain and retain relevancy and is ready and willing to switch on a whim whenever it's convenient for it, with absolutely no connection to anything actually involving true deep insight into my life and what I'm actually thinking, feeling, and going through objectively. I believe the Canadian and probably also United States government are egregiously exploiting narratives that they've always been involved in providing me deep, hidden insights in order to ultimately reach the level of power and influence in the world that I have, in order to attempt to justify their egregious exploitation of me and misrepresentation of me as knowingly and or consensually involved in policies and procedures that ultimately led to the immigration and housing crises through my past utilization of the Ontario Works Social Assistance Program. I suspect this effort is currently, if not always having been, spearheaded through efforts being engaged in by Stephen, as in the guy that goes online by Destiny.